double for the remembrances.
I don't understand.
What is it, Jamal? Where? Right here.
What does that do?
And I have to go and inquire. Otherwise I will be misled.
Because we felt
Yeah.
if he goes to India, he's going to stay there.
Oh.
He doesn't want to come back here because it's bad for his health, the cold winters.
We will.
And we didn't know what to do. We thought, well, we'll never see him again, or if we want to see him, we'll have to go to India. How can we keep him here? Of course, we couldn't keep him there. So the devotees asked me to make a simple documentary, just pictures, moving pictures of Srila Prabhupada. We had photographs to look at. The devotees wanted a film to look at, a movie of Srila Prabhupada, simply something to meditate on, so we could feel close to him. And so I asked Srila Prabhupada if I could do that, and he said yes. So I'm simply in his room with him, and he very kindly tolerated my presence there as I made the movie. I didn't direct Srila Prabhupada at all. I didn't ask him or tell him to do anything. I just followed his lead. This was with an 8mm camera, very simple means. And this was the last day that Srila Prabhupada was in New York. He was leaving the next day for India. Kirtanananda was preparing his packing cases to go on the plane. It was bigger than suitcases, they were trunks. You see, this was really our Prabhupada Murti while he was away in India. The devotees would look at this film, we would just chant our rounds, or we would play a tape of Srila Prabhupada singing a bhajan, or have a kirtan while looking at it. So really not much happens in this movie, except we're looking at Prabhupada and he's looking at us. I would have to change rolls of film, and as I did that, one time Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how the film, which was AGFA, black and white film, high speed, how the film was clipped onto the reel with a little plastic gripper. And Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how it worked. And after I showed him, he said, "They think of everything." When Srila Prabhupada arrived in India, he was going to India for his health. And when he arrived in India and got off the plane, Kirtanananda, who was with him, who went with him as a servant, said that it was like walking into an oven in a letter that was sent to us, and Kirtanananda's comments were there, and then Srila Prabhupada followed up with his comments, and he said, "I find it quite bracy myself." So that was why he went to India, to get braced up. So it's a pretty simple film, but the beauty of Srila Prabhupada is what makes it fascinating.
I was doing a sign that he asked me to do upstairs in that first place where he was offering arti, a sign of the Hare Krishna mantra, because there was going to be a big program at Tompkins Square Park. So the sign was about 4 or 5 feet on oak tag, and I had to sprawl my whole body across it to reach to the other end. We didn't have easels in those days. So I also apologized to Prabhupada when he came in the room that I'm sorry that I'm offending the holy name. So he told the story of when Krishna had a headache and the gopis took the dust from their feet to put on his head to relieve his headache, and they didn't care if they would go to hell as long as Krishna would be cured. So when I apologized, Prabhupada told me that story, and he said it's fine because it's for service. He used to sit and turn the globe, and he would meditate on the different countries, And he would say, Brahmananda, you shall go to Russia. Gorsindar, you shall go to Japan. Somebody else, you shall go to South America. You have to understand, we had no money, we had no manpower, we had nothing. We were a handful of teenagers. 10 people in their early 20s who were rather eccentric, all of us, because we had rejected our cultural values and were following him like a Pied Piper. And he was telling us about these different countries we were going to go to and open temples. He had his plan. It was not haphazardly done. I have a beautiful picture of Prabhupada sitting and turning his globe. He did it a lot. He meditated on the globe. He looked at the different countries. You would see him doing it a lot. And he was planning. He planned the takeover of Russia long before he ever went to Russia. This is like a part of what he knew he had to come to this world and do. We just didn't know what all he was doing. Although sometimes in Montreal, when we had a lot of time and he would talk, he used to talk to me about his different plans. We had no money. We lived in a little flat. We had rats too. There was nothing. And yet he was telling me how he was going to have a World Sankirtan party. And he also told me how he wanted to have a big auditorium where people could come and watch bhajans and hear bhajans and see plays and Krishna conscious things rather than going to the cinemas. He felt the cinemas were drawing people into another world. He had plans of doing this. And when I go to Bombay and I see that great big auditorium, I go, he said he was going to do this. It's just like if I'm a pauper and I tell you I'm going to build Disneyland. And that's what it was like. But I never disbelieved anything he said. I just listened. I was just always like listening to him. And he liked to talk about what he was going to do. And he talked about many things.
Now this painting, which was done by Jadharan, is a painting of Vrindavan. It's the Madan Mohan temple. This is one of the first paintings that Jadharani did. And it's Madan Mohan. Madan Mohan temple that Sanatana Goswami erected for the first deity in Lord Chaitanya's movement. Prabhupada would give her a picture and she would copy that into a painting. Prabhupada, he hung it right above his head. He sat underneath this. So it's the first Western connection, you might say, with Vrindavan. And here's the personification of Vrindavan sitting there.
I did this painting, and then Prabhupada was going back to India in July of '67. And we were all devastated that he was going. But then he looked at this picture and he said, if you look at this picture, then we'll all be together, even though I'm in India. And if you chant Hare Krishna, then we're all packed up tight, even though I'm in India and you're here.
And of course everybody was a brand new devotee. And nobody really knew much of anything. So there was also a lot of nonsense going on, and there, fighting and things like that. So I became disturbed, and I went to see Prabhupada to complain about some of the things that devotees were doing. And Prabhupada said to me, if you don't like what they are doing, then you set the example. A little later, I again went to see him to complain about devotees, and Srila Prabhupada said, what do you want from them? They are trying to serve Krishna. And the third time was in 1972, I think. I was living in San Francisco, and I wrote Prabhupada a letter just complaining about so many things. And Prabhupada wrote me back, I complain people who do bad things and they're the example and this and that. And Prabhupada said, who said that they're an example? He said, anyway, what are you doing? All you're doing is making money and spending it on your own household life. And he ended the letter and said, the whole movement is meant for... Because I had said, I don't understand this movement. Prabhupada said, you've been with me for so many years and you still don't understand. When will you understand? He said, the whole movement is meant for service.
Oh, here's the Jagannath deities that Shamsundar made. He made 4 sets. When Prabhupada came to the airport, we had to collect the baggage. We walked over to the baggage place where the baggage came out. These big wooden crates came, and Prabhupada pointed, there was his suitcase, but then he said also, these wooden crates. Of course, we had no idea what was in them. Neither did we ask. And we brought the crates back. So these crates were in the next room, and Prabhupada told us to go and open the crates. So we went and opened the crates, and there were these Jagannath deities. But we had never seen Jagannath in New York, because, you know, Jagannath came from San Francisco, Puri. Just as Prabhupada made Vrindavan in New York, he made San Francisco Puri. So we look at these Jagannath deities, we can't figure out, I mean, it's not Krishna. What is it? And then somebody was saying, making jokes that these look like North American Indian. It's a totem pole. And there's 3 parts to the totem pole. So we're trying to figure out which one is on top, which one is in the middle, which one's on the bottom to make the totem pole. That's what we were thinking. There's the ladder that I was painting the apartment with. I didn't quite finish. And then Prabhupada walked in and he saw us, and we were like joking, like, wow, this is really far out, an Indian totem pole. And then Prabhupada said, this is Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe. Bow down. And everybody, boom, hit the floor. That's how Prabhupada introduced Jagannath worship. So those deities were worshipped, but we had drunks coming into the storefront and so on. It wasn't proper to have them available or vulnerable, you know. So we kept them in the apartment and worshipped there.
So about a week or so before Prabhupada arrived, I put up hundreds of these flyers all over the city on lampposts and billboards and in stores and any place I could, advertising Prabhupada's Bhakti Yoga and Bhagavad Gita classes. Prabhupada always had his trunk as his desk. Wherever we went, he had his Indian trunk, and all of his stuff would fit in it, and then we would move to another city. And then whenever we got to whatever room we were going to be in, then I would take all his stuff out of his trunk and arrange his room, and his trunk was his desk. It was just how we lived. It was normal. And he would sit on the floor. So I would commonly spend 2 or 3 hours a day sitting in front of him taking dictation of letters, because often Prabhupada would just talk. But you see, there weren't so many letters in those days. There were maybe 10 a day, sometimes less. And so there was time, and he would talk about everything. Trains and buses, and which is better, trains or buses, about tigers, about all kinds of things. He would sit and talk. One of the sweetest times was in the evening when Gorsinder would give him massage, because all the work for the day had been done. And I would sit at the doorway and listen. We were like a family. It was just, he used to say, we've become just like a family. He used to tell me, my mother died at an early age. Krishna has sent you to be my mother. And actually, I was only 21 years old, or 20 years old, and he was the age of my grandfather, because he was in his 70s. When I would rent an apartment for him, I would just tell the landlord I'm getting it for my grandfather. Once they called him, he was coming, and Jadharani, who was not much of a cook, asked him if he would be eating before he came, or whether they should have something for him to eat when he arrived. And so Prabhupada said, I am just like a cow. I can eat in one pasture and then eat in another pasture also.
That's Damodar offering obeisances with the camera. See, that's devotional filmmaking.
During that Boston trip, almost every week, new faces used to show up from New York. All the New York devotees would come up, Brahmananda, Rai Rama, Rupanuga. And the Boston temple had always been a small temple, like 3 people, 2 people, 5 people, 6 people, but never more than about 5 or 6. But during Prabhupada's visit there, it was just packed with mostly New York devotees. I remember the day after the Brahmin initiation, we were all went on a walk. I was also there. And I equipped, Boston Brahmins. Yes, Boston Brahmins. There were 6 of us that got sacred thread in the first initiation, 6 men, and no women. Then they raised a fuss, and they didn't show up. They were so angry that they weren't going to get second initiation. They didn't come.
Gorsinder really wanted this Gayatri mantra, so he talked to Prabhupada about it. He was reading all kinds of things, and so Prabhupada agreed to give him Gayatri mantra and give him second initiation. And so I met him on the street, and he had his hair all shaved off. That really bothered me. But that night he had the Gayatri mantra initiation, and I was upset, because he was going to give Gorsinder a mantra, but he wasn't going to give it to me. So I felt very left out. So when it came time to go for the initiation ceremony, I said, well, I'm not feeling very well, so I'm not going to go. I was pouting. And then after they left, I thought to myself, what am I doing? I don't want to be not there. So I ran out the door and ran the 10 blocks all the way to the temple and burst into the temple. And Prabhupada was sitting there giving the initiation, and he looked up and he said, Govinda Dasi, I was wondering how you could stay away. You love to hear me speak so much. Because he wanted me to come. But I was mad. I was very upset about this. And so because I was a little upset, he decided that the girls also should have Gayatri mantra. Jadharani was more upset. And so he gave us initiation the next evening with the Gayatri mantra, because he knew that in this country the girls and the boys are educated in the same way. On this particular day, he took us downtown, where he went when he first got off the Jaladuta boat, because the captain was doing some shopping, so he took Prabhupada. Prabhupada was pointing out different places that he remembered. And the next day, Prabhupada took all the devotees for a tour of where he first landed. I was in the back and I ran up so that I could walk right next to him. And he turned to me and he said, if the jackals glorify you, what's the benefit? In other words, don't try and get material glorification. And then he said, because, the nature of any big city is that things are being broken down and things are being built up. He said, building and breaking. So we have to stop this building and breaking, and we have to break with Maya and build with Krishna.
Prabhupada would arrive, I think, by taxi. But in the meantime, the devotees were chanting in the temple there at 95 Glenville Avenue, deep in kirtan. And there would be all this frankincense. The whole room was full of smoke. When Prabhupada would come in, we were literally in ecstasy. You cannot conceive of the impact that Prabhupada had on us. Prabhupada's every move and every gesture, he was just floating in ecstasy. And we could perceive that bliss that Prabhupada was in. And I remember he got up on the Vyasa-san and he said, the secret is to be praying while we're chanting the name of Krishna. Please, Krishna, just place me in the society of your service.
All along, everyone knew him as Swamiji. This is up until May of 1968. And so, Gorsunder decided he wanted to call me Govindaji, and so he asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, no, actually G is a third-class form of address. It's better not to call her Govindaji. So I piped up, I was sitting right in front of him, and I said, well, if it's a third-class form of address, why are we calling you G? Why are we calling you Swamiji? And he said, it's not very important. I said, oh no, it's very important. If it's a third-class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. We want to call you most first-class form of address. So tell us what would be a good name for us to call you by. And he was very humble, very reluctant. But I pressed him. We've got to change this. And he said, you can call me Gurudev or Guru Maharaj or Prabhupada. So I said, well, that's 3. We need 1. And so I said, well, which one is the best? And he answered, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. So I said, from today, you will be called Srila Prabhupada. And so I told all the devotees. Some of the devotees didn't like it because it kind of is a tongue twister. Prabhupada and Swamiji kind of flows more easily. But we gradually started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that time.
A total of about 15 people who immediately after the festival moved into the temple in San Francisco. The temple was just a very narrow storefront with Dutch-style doors that Shamasunder had built. So a great family environment. There was no Mangalarti in those days. There were no books in those days. So it was actually the power of the chanting of the holy name and the incredible charisma of the Rath Yatra festival that was drawing the devotees into the temple.
This is actually the second Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco. The first one, held in 1967, was just on the back of a rented truck, a Hertz truck. It was a very short procession. This is the first actual Rath Yatra in the Western world done with a cart, which Jayananda and myself built along with a couple of other devotees. We're bending redwood struts for the canopies. The entire cart was made out of redwood that we got very cheaply from a wrecking company which was demolishing old homes in San Francisco. We sanded every board so that it looked like new wood. You can't find wood like this anymore. And we formed it over many weeks of effort in the parking lot next to the temple on Frederick Street. We built it purposely low to fit below the wires, and in those days they had electric trolleys still on the streets in San Francisco. In those days the carts were one of a kind. When the parade was finished, they were dismantled in place and the wood was hauled off and disposed of. And Malati and the other girls sewed the cloth covering.
That year was the first year that Lord Jagannath ever wore clothes. Srila Prabhupada told us that we had to make clothes for him, and he drew a little picture. And I remember Shyam Sundar said he was like shocked. He goes, because he was very proud of how carefully he painted the deities. He goes, and cover up the paint job. But Jamuna and Harsharani, they immediately came to the grips with the task, making beautiful outfits and turbans. The very, very first clothing or decoration that was given to Lord Jagannath was, of course, given by Srila Prabhupada, and that wasn't in June of 1968, but that was in December of 1967 when Srila Prabhupada returned from India after recuperation from his heart attack. And Srila Prabhupada came off the plane with his danda. First time we'd seen Srila Prabhupada with his sannyas rod. And hanging off of his sannyas rod was a little saffron pouch. And we thought how curious that was, because we thought that the rod you held in front of you, but Srila Prabhupada had this rod over his shoulder, and the little pouch was on the end. At any rate, we brought him to the Willard Street apartment. So when Srila Prabhupada sat down in the front room, he had his suitcases open. He had brought gifts for all the ladies. Every lady had a sari. And he brought our temple the first gift of a coconut grater. But in the little bag, he opened it up, unwrapped it, and unfolded it. And inside were 3 silken malas, the kind that you get at a deity store. For the small deities, of course, these are very, very thin, maybe a quarter of an inch wide. But these malas that Srila Prabhupada bought were a good 1.5 inches thick. But because they were in this little bag, they were all crunched up. and actually quite unattractive looking because they'd been a little bit damaged. So naturally we had never seen anything like that. What was it? So Swamiji explained that these were decorations that we could offer to Lord Jagannath. And in fact, Lord Jagannath, we could even make clothes for him. So what kind of clothes would you make? Doesn't he already have clothes on? Isn't that what the painting is that's on the deity? No, he said that's one kind of painting. You'll find deities will be sometimes painted, sometimes there'll be carving on the deities that will show that it's jewelry or clothing, but no, you can make clothes. So what kind of clothes do you make for a deity like Jagannath? So Prabhupada said, here's what you do. So he said he wears a turban and he wears a shawl, and they wear like little skirt. So then he asked for volunteers who would sew. So Harsharani and Yamuna decided, well, we will volunteer. So for this 1968 Rath Yatra, we were working with the builders, and when they gave us the drawing, we had come up with this very, very handsome, already made and pleated series of umbrellas, almost like umbrellas that went around these outpourings of these cupolas in this wonderful bright cloth of saffron and gold. Now Jagannath, Subhadra and Balaram were in red satin, and you can see the pictures of them. We even managed to get some wonderful garlands of fragrant flowers for this, red turbans.
Jayananda planned the car and built the car, and subsequently every year he was known as Mr. Rath Yatra. He would not sleep before the festival, and each year it improved the decoration from 1 car to 3. This was the first car that he built. It's so beautiful. This became and has remained a San Francisco tradition. On this day is a special day for Lord Jagannath, and this is acknowledged by the officials of San Francisco.
One very exciting thing about this Rath Yatra festival for me was this prayer, Gauranga Balite Habe Pulaka Sharira. This bhajan. This bhajan was the theme, practically, when there wasn't a kirtan going on by one of the disciples. This bhajan was played over a little megaphone system of Prabhupada singing it, and it sometimes played on the cart if somebody wasn't leading, in between kirtans. At the end of the procession, when the cart was at the beach, this bhajan of Prabhupada played for hours and hours, the devotees said. I remember just the short time that I was at the beach, that when the wind would move back and forth, it would catch the sound of this magnificent prayer, and in my mind it's always been the theme of our 1968 Rath Yatra festival, of Lord Chaitanya's longing for Krishna. And I remember that when we were at an ocean kirtan one night, at the very end of the prayers, after he said Jaya Tulsi Devi, and he said, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. And we said, Hare Krishna. And he said, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. Hare Krishna, all glories to the Pacific Ocean. And he had his hands raised when he was facing the ocean. And it was I think it was the only time that I can remember Prabhupada adding something other than our classic prayers to the end of kirtan. But it moved us all. We were thinking how liberal Swamiji was, that he was appreciating the place that we were at and the majesty of it.
I was living in the Bay Area at the time, basically as a hippie. But I always had aspirations to understand transcendence. Therefore, I didn't really consider myself a hippie. I considered myself a seeker. And when I heard that there was the Rath Yatra festival being held by the Hare Krishna devotees through Golden Gate Park in 1968, I made up my mind to try to get there. And I think I walked the whole way, which is why I ended up being late. So I must have walked several miles, because I came at the end of the festival and I saw Lord Jagannath looking out at the ocean. Now, I had visited the temple a few times, but it was the moment that I saw Lord Jagannath gazing out into the ocean that somehow some eternal quality was sparked, and at that moment I became a devotee.
Long towards summer, Prabhupada went to Montreal, and I wrote to him and begged forgiveness for my offenses and told him I couldn't forget him, couldn't forget Krishna consciousness, and I wanted to surrender to him. He wrote back and said, oh my dear son, how have I ever lost you? I've been crying to Krishna, how have I lost Kirtanananda? And he invited us to come and visit him in Montreal. We did, and he embraced me very warmly and said, now it is confirmed that we cannot be separated.
One morning, one of the devotees asked me to bring over some boga to Srila Prabhupada's, where he was staying, and so I walked over there with the groceries, and I knocked real softly on the door, and Himavati opened the door, just a little crack, and I handed her the boga, and the corner of my eye, when I looked down through the crack, I saw Srila Prabhupada sitting and chanting japa, and Srila Prabhupada asked Himavati, who's at the door? And Himavati said, Kanchabala came to bring boga, and then Prabhupada said, tell her to come in. So I came in, and I didn't expect it at all. It was just really a wonderful surprise, and I just fell down bow down and offered obeisances. And Prabhupada told me to sit down and we chanted japa together. That was real nice.
So when Prabhupada came, they rented him a small room, and I got the opportunity to spend, maybe it was 5 days with Prabhupada. And it was just a room, and it sort of had a little side alcove where there was a sink and a place where you could cook something. So I slept under that sink and in that area. The first night I was so nervous I couldn't sleep. About 1 in the morning I heard Prabhupada rustling and getting up. And he didn't turn on the light or anything. And he started chanting on his beads. So I wondered, what should I do? Should I get up or pretend I'm sleeping? I didn't know what I should do. So I didn't do anything. I pretended I was sleeping. But the next day the same thing happened. I was so nervous I couldn't sleep again. So when Prabhupada got up and started chanting, then I also made myself known. So Prabhupada, he turned on the light and he said, "Oh, you're up?" I said, "Well, Prabhupada, I'm so nervous I haven't been able to sleep." And he said, "Oh, that's good, very good." He said, I think sleeping is a waste of time." He said, "I don't like to sleep." He said, "And I don't like my disciples to sleep." Then he said, "Practically speaking, our aim is to make eating 0, sleeping 0, sex 0, and defense 0. We don't say that, but that is the aim."
The Montreal temple, was going very well, but we always had a difficult time paying the monthly rent. And there was some danger that they would lose the temple at one point because they just didn't have the rent money. And Prabhupada actually proposed the idea to me and Pradyumna that we should go out and meet people in the Indian community and explain to them that we were trying to establish this Radha Krishna temple here and maintain this temple, and that we would like their support and help. But in any case, Pradyumna and I didn't actually follow up that instruction. I think that we just didn't know how to go about doing it. But one thing that I did know how to do, I knew how to sort of go out and raise money at an airport. I mean, I was just a young boy, 17. I remember being short on my airline fare a couple of times, and I didn't know what to do. So I just started asking people, "Could you spare a buck? I'm, $5 short on my flight." And sort of miraculously, people were kind enough to give me a few dollars. And here I was. I had absolutely no skill. I went out and went to the airport, and I just started doing that, and I managed to raise a few $100s, and I gave it to the temple for the rent, and I wasn't even aware that Prabhupada knew about it, really. But about 4 or 5 years later, just out of the blue, Prabhupada said to me, he said, "I remember when you raised the money to save the Montreal temple." And I was so touched to realize that Prabhupada had this memory of me, that I had done some service to help save the temple. And it just really surprised me because I had no idea that Prabhupada was aware of that or that he would remember that. I'll never forget, in so many ways, Prabhupada always expressed such kindness and love for his disciples.
Janardhan arranged one time for Prabhupada to go speak to the professors at McGill University. They had a faculty meeting or something, so Prabhupada went to join them for dinner. Prabhupada doesn't eat dinner with people who eat meat and stuff, but he said, "I'm not supposed to do this," but he says, "It's for preaching, I'll go." See, after Boston, Prabhupada went to Montreal, and he spent the whole summer there. Actually, he had to go there because his visa was finished, and he had to leave the country. And it was uncertain even whether Prabhupada would be able to ever return to the United States. And Allen Ginsberg was helping, Ramananda was at Ginsberg working with lawyers to try to get his. And they said the only way he can do this is if he leaves the country. He has to leave the country to make a new visa application. And it has to be 3 months at least. So Prabhupada established in Montreal, and he said, "It's okay. Doesn't matter, we get it, we don't get it, then I'll make Montreal the world headquarters." And a lot of devotees came up from the summer, and then it was under application. And then about in August sometime it came through. He got it.
This building is the first temple they had in Buffalo. It was LaSalle Avenue, not far from the university. I saw the devotees there, and they were advertising the Sunday feast, and I used to see them in some of the classrooms at night with cartels and burning incense, and I was very kind of curious about them. There was a class offered that was called Introduction to Vedic Literature. So Rupanuga presented this class on Krishna consciousness.
Rupanuga Prabhu had invited him because he was giving a bhakti yoga class at the university there, at the University of Buffalo. Srila Prabhupada stayed around a week.